How did you become so confident?
How did I become so confident? Well, let me address confidence. I think the more we know who we actually are, and the more we're able to take an accurate assessment of our skills and our abilities, the more confident we seem, because we're able to make what would appear to be a logical, rational decision about our ability based on real-world feedback that makes it easier to be confident in an outcome based on demonstrated competency and skill set. And so I think a lot of this comes down to practice, 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 practice. And as you get better and better at something, you will get increasingly more confident in yourself. The key, though, is to make the decision to do something even if we don't feel confident in the moment. There are plenty of times where I didn't feel confident, and I made the decision to show up anyway, and it built my confidence. Now, I will say your mental fortitude, your mentality here is going to matter a lot, and your internal story about yourself matters a lot. If you have a lot of negative self-talk, you're going to want to work yourself through that. And so one of the things you can do is ask yourself, what evidence do I have that I'm good at this? What evidence do I have that I've demonstrated competency in this area? And so a lot of times, if you just remind yourself of your past accomplishments, it can help you feel confident moving forward into your next accomplishment or the next thing you're going after. Now, if you're moving into an area that you don't have any skill set in yet, or you don't have any experience in, then I would pivot slightly to look at it more from, hey, I may not be good at this yet, but I will get good at it. So you become confident in your ability to adjust and make the adjustments to learn and to grow and continue to get better and better at whatever it is you're seeking to do. But a lot of it is just in doing, getting out there and practicing. And it turns out the more we do something, generally, the more confident we get as we continue to improve and learn. You aren't going to get confident at something just sitting in bed thinking about it.
What happens when your inner voice is not aligned with logic?
What do we do when our inner voice isn't aligned with logic? Well, generally, I would say trust your inner voice, but you may get your ass kicked in process. Because as you're figuring out who you are, that inner voice may not actually be that small, still, higher self voice. That could be emotions, that could be trauma responses, that could be wounds that haven't been processed yet. And a lot of times, if we're not self-aware enough to recognize that, we will say, oh, I'm just following my heart, or I'm following my intuition. I will say this. The only way you're going to get better at it and recognizing what it is to honor and listen to it. But if you find yourself constantly getting into outcomes that you did not intend, that are negative, by listening to that small, still voice, I may well evaluate whether it is actually the small, still voice of my higher self or my superego, or whether or not this is simply a trauma response that I am justifying because it feels good. My experience with intuition is it tends to be a quiet, still, peaceful voice that does not speak in fear and does not motivate from emotion per se. And so if I start feeling if it's a fearful response to something, I will take pause if I can to evaluate where this is coming from. But this is a good question. I love this one. And the answer is, first and foremost, honor it and practice and see what comes up. If you find that you're getting the answers you want or the results you want by listening to it, even if it doesn't seem logical, then you're probably on the right path. If you find yourself constantly in shitty situations that were not your intended outcome, you may want to evaluate what voice you're actually hearing.
How to get rid of fear?
I mean, there's layers to this one. Fear may be tied to a trauma response, a coping strategy, a survival response. And if that's the case, then you probably need to get healthy and whole, and you may want to get a coach or a therapist or a professional to help you with that. If it's the fear of the unknown, get comfortable with the unknown. If it's fear of not being good at something, work at getting good at it. And the better you get, the less fearful you'll become. I don't know if getting rid of all fear is a good thing. Some fear can serve you if you know how to alchemize it into something that motivates you and pushes you. It just depends on where it's coming from. And also, fear doesn't have to stop you. I think the definition of courage or bravery isn't the lack of fear, it's the choosing to move forward or choosing to make the decision despite the fear. And so that's the other thing you can do, is just learn how to not let fear stop you and to continue to make the decisions towards your higher self based in principle and clear value despite the way you feel. And you may find that the fear begins to dissipate over the time. Just like We're very usually afraid of something we don't understand or something we've never done before, but once we do it enough times, the fear kind of dissipates on its own or become less fearful of it, simply because we have a better understanding of it. And then proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. A lot of fear can be mitigated by simply making sure we're preparing properly and we're doing the things necessarily to get the intended outcome.
I'm struggling with time management. Do you have any tips?
My experience has been those who struggle with time management generally struggle with money management. Time and money are the same resource held different ways. And the other one I would add there is energy. Time, energy, and money are all generally resources held in different states. Don't believe me? When you become wealthy, you will gladly trade money for time and energy. When you don't have money, you will gladly trade time and energy for money. It's resources held in different states. And so I can generally tell the direction somebody's moving in their life by how well they steward the resources they have. So it's going to be hard, for most people, it's going to be hard to be great with money if you aren't great with your time and your energy. And so if I have somebody that I'm dealing with that's saying, hey, I'm struggling with time management, in any case, I would walk through their day and go, well, where are you struggling and why? And what I'm trying to identify is what are you valuing more than being efficient with your time? As a general rule, I would try, and I do operate under this, I want to be efficient with things. I want to be effective with people. And so I do my best to not treat people like things and be efficient with them. I want to be effective with them. So for me to understand the time management piece, I'd kind of want to understand what's motivating you and what values you're driving your decisions by. But we always do what we value most. Always do what we value most. Caveat, I would say, in that moment. So if you're not being efficient with your time, there's something else you want more. So if you're like, well, I find myself doom scrolling when I could be working out, or I find myself on social media when I could be reading a book. Well, there's something you are getting from social media or from doom scrolling that's keeping you in that loop that you value more than the things you think you should do. So I would look at discovering, well, what needs are these meeting that is overriding my desire to be efficient with my time? So I'd start there. Just use it as a way to get to know yourself more. Invite yourself into the exploration of understanding you. Why is it that I don't value my time as much as I think I should? Should is a judgment word. And so you may want to look at what idealistic self have I set up that is inaccurate to who I actually am. And remember, but if this is challenging to hear, figure out why. We always do what we value most.
What tools do you recommend for increasing self-esteem?
I think there's a few things that help with self-esteem. One is getting good at something. And it almost doesn't matter what. The world will reward you for being excellent at about anything. And if you don't believe me, Tiger Woods has made hundreds of millions of dollars because he is fantastic at putting a tiny little white ball in a tiny little hole. I would argue, beyond entertainment value and perhaps inspiration, that doesn't hold a lot of practical real world value, but he still makes a lot of money for it because we reward excellence just in general. And so I think a lot of self-esteem can simply be built by getting good at something. Also, again, if you have a negative self-image that maybe is tied to a trauma response or a really bad early life experience, then you may want to look at getting therapy or going to someone that can help you process and heal those stories of value so you can reintegrate those parts back into your life, forgive yourself, forgive others, and integrate those wounds so that they don't constantly nag at you. Normally, when I see somebody who struggles with self-esteem, they tend to have a very negative self-image and they have a negative story of who they think they are. And so most of the pain in this world, in this realm, is tied to our story of self, our identity. All of the greatest questions in this world are tied to our identity. Who am I? And our story of self very much determines how that plays out. And so if I'm struggling with self-esteem, I want to do the work of, well, how do I see myself and why? But everyone comes here has inherent value. I believe that they have a calling and a mission that they're on, and you simply have to discover what that is. And part of it may be healing these parts of yourself that make you feel like you are valued less. And I would invite you into that process.
How can I learn to say no without being rude?
Say no. Practice saying no. So how do I say no? If somebody can't trust you with a no, they're not going to be able to trust you with a yes. And so it's important that you learn how to say no. It gets easier, by the way, to say no when you are very clear about what your yeses are. And so it's easy for me to generally tell where somebody is and how clear their vision is by how easy it is for them to say no to things that don't align with what they're really about. If you are saying yes to things you don't want to do, I would invite you into discovering, well, what is it that I'm valuing there? Is it that I don't want to let this person down, that I care more about what they think of me than what I think about myself? Do I believe I can be all things to all people? Everywhere that there is a disconnect between who we want to be and who we actually are, there is an opportunity to develop self-awareness and to understand who we are and how we are showing up and why we're showing up that way. So we could say anywhere in our life where we have an unintended consequence, we lack self-awareness. If I'm continually doing something that is in alignment with what I really want, there's probably a reason that is unconscious. And so again, if I'm saying yes to things that I don't want to be, there is a value that is overriding my desire to not do this. And it could be approval of others. It could be not wanting to let people down. It may be an image thing where you want to let everyone feel like they can trust you with anything and everything. There's a host of reasons why people can't say no, but the practice is in just learning how to say no. And as you get more and more comfortable with it, you'll recognize that most people will respect you more for saying no to things that you can't do. I can tell you in my own work and with my teams, I would rather somebody tell me no because they know it's not possible for them to do it or they don't have the bandwidth and then can commit to something they can't actually do. And so I think it's a practice first and foremost, and then discover what makes that hard for you.